Cool. Thank you all for joining tonight. We have a great panel ahead of us. Hope you've been enjoying the happy hour. I'll give a quick intro about myself before we start. I'm Marcos. I lead engineering at Statsig. I've been at Statsig since we started 3.5 years ago. Before this, I was at Facebook for 5 years. I worked on the gaming team there, on the team that works on kind of like the Candy Crush, Farmville web applications, trying to optimize that. And it's kind of where we got the inspiration for Statsig. Facebook has really great internal tools for experimentation and feature flagging, and we wanted to build those same tools for everyone out there. And so what we did was, in this 3.5 years, we built a really solid experimentation platform, and we want to continue building those same kinds of world-class tools for other essential product building tools. So not just experimentation, but we have an analytics tool right now that we're making better and better every day. We're doing session replay now, and just other essential tools. Before I introduce the panelists, we're going to do a Q&A at the end from audience questions. You can join our Slack by scanning the QR code at the top. And so you have questions, you can ask them there, and then we'll ask them at the end. And then we also want to say thanks to Devlocity, who's a developer recruiting tool. They helped promote this event. So if you're interested in them, you can scan the bottom QR code. Cool. So we have 3 great panelists today. Do you all want to introduce yourselves? And give a fun fact as well.
Fun fact. Yeah. Hi. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm Amelia Waddington. I'm the CPO of an ad tech company called Captify. So we're not super well-known brand. We're B2B rather than B2C. So I'll explain a little bit about what we do. We collect search data from across the internet, and we use that to help advertisers find the right target audience for their campaign, find them wherever they are, whether that's watching a TV program or in the digital space and out of home too. I'm the CPO there, but I am sometimes it's referred to as CPTO. I have technology, product, data acquisition, and insights. So thanks so much. Fun fact, I was warned about this, so I've been thinking about it a lot. I'm a mother of 2, so I very rarely have any fun between a big job and a family. But when I am taking time for myself, I'd like to practice yoga. Not particularly interesting, but it does keep me sane and, continually practice. And one day I will be able to stand on my head for more than 1 second, hopefully.
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm the VP Engineering here at Monzo. I've been here 4 years. I came here via working at Deliveroo, where I led the delivery teams, working on all the logistics stuff, and Twitter before that. I work in a couple of places, including our core banking product, which is our joint account, the personal account, some of our growth teams, and some of our platform teams as well, platform and security. The fun fact is the hardest thing. The fun fact is that I had not thought about the fun fact until this point. This is the first tech company I've ever worked at that has been profitable, which is, I don't know if that says anything about the choices of company that I go to. But
correlation is not causation.
Well,
right?
exactly.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Shachar. I've been with data for the past 20 years. I started my career as a DBA, and then I've been in different data and leadership roles in different companies, from scale-ups and startups all the way to companies as big as PayPal and Meta or Facebook. My last role at Meta, I spent 6.5 years. I was the London data engineering site lead, growing this function from 4 data engineers when I started to more than 200. I've worked on a small portfolio of products in ads, managing the data for a $7 billion business. And in my last role, I was the director of data engineering for all of Facebook, Instagram, and Messenger's trust and safety problems. I left Facebook last year to start my own business. I'm a data advisor this day. And when I don't work, I enjoy flying helicopters, airplanes, cooking, and spending time with family. The fun fact, Joe Biden, the President of the United States, owes me $400. And if you want to find out more, catch me later. It's a good story.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you all. So first question we can start off with. So you all obviously have a very data-driven background. How do you build the data-driven muscle in your teams, in your current teams?
I can go first. So I think that there's a few things. The muscle to be data-driven really has to start with the kind of underlying like data and organizing that. I've seen quite a lot over my career, so you know, I'm old enough to have been around when like the data scientist was first invented, and it was like the cool new thing, and everyone invested in all these brilliant data scientists, and then we're like, well, actually, all our data is in like a gazillion different databases, and or even worse than that, you know, completely unstored and unorganized. So I think that it's really important if you want to start a data-driven culture and start that kind of practice within your business, that you kind of start with the boring, really like the data engineering stuff, right? It's like, it's not so sexy, but if you don't have that foundation, then you're kind of preaching around the philosophy of how to use data and what to do with data is just going to fall on kind of very frustrated ears, and teams will kind of get quite annoyed with it.
I guess building on that, one of the biggest lessons I've had in a couple of the companies that I've worked in has been the importance of standardization, certainly when you are determining metrics and you're reporting on them, and teams are experimenting with them, to have a very consistent definition of what you're measuring that everyone shares, such that when you're conversing, you're making prioritization calls, when you're thinking about the impact of various experiments, that actually you are truly comparing like with like. We had so many examples at Deliveroo where we were measuring maybe 7-day actives slightly differently, or we were measuring reorder frequency slightly differently. Even just those like very small changes in how someone forms a SQL query, where they make a very small cutoff in some of the data that they might be gathering, has enormous effects in how you actually work out whether or not this thing is successful or not. And so standardization and making sure everyone has a very consistent measure has been like a really, really crucial. That's like more for when you're scaling up a bit more. So it's not necessarily about instantiating the culture in the first place, but once you've created a bit of that, having consistency is like really critical.
So I actually got that question from the CEO of a company I was advising to a couple of months ago, and he was asking me, Shachar, I've worked in data-driven companies my entire career, and he's now the CEO of a 2,000 people company. He said, that's the first time I work in a company that's not data-driven, and I don't know how to get it started. And I said, okay, what do you mean by that? Tell me more. And he said, like, you know, I ask questions, I don't get answers, people don't drive with data, they make random decisions, I don't even know why they make these decisions. And I told him, Rob, like, instead of asking 200 questions, choose 2 questions and ask them 200 times, right? Literally in every meeting you need to ask one of these questions and keep repeating that like a broken record until you get an answer, right? Until somebody in the organizations know the answer and you're like, okay, I want to work with you on that. And then see if you can get more answers from that person and start asking more questions and more questions. And also, I think the other part is that people often don't think about. People think that data is a technology problem, where I think there's a lot of psychological aspects to it and trust, right? So building trust and creating the right incentives around data. Like if you find this one person who is able to answer questions, reward that, right? Celebrate that. Show the rest of the organization, yeah, that's how I want to work. Showcase that and make people understand that that's the way from now on. And I think repetition is one of the strongest tools to achieve that and find the path, because, you know, just like experiments, right? You have to have some level of consistency. If you just try everything and shoot in every direction, you know, some things might work, but you don't know why, because you don't have a clear idea why this is working. So you have to be almost very methodical about that. Experiment, find a way that's working, and keep taking it from there. Yeah.
Awesome, makes sense. So it's like in your minds, what is the prioritization for building this data-driven? So it's, you know, you have to start with actually be able to measure it and have that data, and you want to standardize at some point. But what are the most important things that you want to build first? Like having the analytics, experimentation. What is like the sequence of things that you go and build when you're building a new team?
So in our team at the moment, we have quite an interesting situation where a lot of our kind of user experience data is actually outside of our control. So we work with advertising platforms. So I was talking to some people before the talk around the sort of supply side and demand side of advertising, where the actual impression data and the log data and the performance data and the clicks are stored. And obviously all of those platforms that we integrate with are, completely different formats and that kind of thing. So that's literally the building blocks of what we're doing, is that standardization. But the work, I think, before that has really been to understand what is the key for us in advertising, what's the key performance measure that our clients are really interested in, because there's lots of different things you can measure. So we spent quite a lot of time talking to clients around what's the key thing for them in terms of performance, but also then looking at our sales data and correlating those performance measures with our churn rates and our retention rates. So understanding which of the things we can measure in a kind of advertising performance sense is really making a difference to the business and to the revenue, to make sure, to your point, we're measuring the right thing and we're not kind of optimizing to something that isn't actually having an impact on either revenue or retention.
I'd say for us, or for me, the first most important thing before you get to the data is writing down what you actually want to achieve, and almost writing it down in text form. That's your objective function, and then working out what data maps to what data maps to that, and what measurement you have or what measurement you don't have, as a deficit from that statement. Almost making sure that your guiding objective is well understood, is human readable. And then determining what are the measures of that is, I think, is the thing that means that everyone can be absolutely clear on what's the most important thing, and the measures can fall out of that.
And I hate to say it, but as a data person, I thought when I started advising and working with companies, and also with very early stage companies, some of them are like 2 founders, 3 engineers, and that's pretty much it. I thought, okay, I'm going to go and teach them how to do data right from day one and build good foundations, and it's going to be amazing, and then they grow, and they have the best platforms in the world. And I really hate to say it, but I think that at the very early stages, data actually shouldn't be a priority for the organization. Like at the super early stages, you need to figure out what your product is, what your market is, your positioning, how you're going to grow it. You need to build something. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you need to build something that can create value and get real feedback from users. And that's going to be the most valuable data. If people keep using your product, that's your data. Like that means that you're doing something right. If you're a B2B company, get 1 or 2 customers who really want to work with you and are even willing to pay money, that's all you need. If you're a B2C company, get a few customers, show that you're able to retain them for a while, that's all you need. And at that point, I think that when you're starting to have customers, this is where data becomes more important. And I think that that's the point where I would hire my first analyst. I wouldn't invest too much in tools and technology, which means that they would have very hard lives, right? Because they will need to work with data in Mixpanel or Google Analytics or past logs or whatever, and their tools are going to be very limited. But be able to measure very basic things and understand what is happening at a high level. And only then I would go and hire the first data engineer who will start building the data platform, data warehouse, build some dashboards, build proper metrics. And that's the point where I think standardization comes in. And let's agree on our metrics, on our taxonomy. What do we actually mean when we say customer? What do we actually mean when we say products? And create that level of alignment, both from a technical perspective, but also in the organization. I think that's the sort of sequence that I would imagine if you're starting small and growing.
Awesome, makes sense. So once you've built this data-driven muscle, what are the challenges that you've seen once you have these teams that are data-driven, are running experiments, are looking at the data? Are there different challenges that you see once these teams are actually more developed?
I feel like I'm taking the questions first all the time.
So, what are the challenges I've seen? So one of the challenges I've seen is that if you're not again super sure about what it is that you're actually looking to drive in the long term or change in the long term, and you're therefore not measuring that, the effects that you are measuring might give you some clue that you're doing better, but you're actually ultimately harming yourself long term. There's an experiment that we ran many years ago at the food delivery company where we created a price randomization experiment where we created this curve. We would randomize prices for the delivery along the curve, and it would effectively attempt to target a acceptance level where we wanted to charge people as much money as possible and see what we could get away with. Okay, it wasn't phrased as quite like that. And this experiment was great. It found that in South Kensington we could charge people a whole heap of money, and they would order a whole heap of food, and we could charge them a load of money. And so the basket values went up, and the delivery values went up, and it was fantastic. But actually, when you went and looked at how those customers performed over a much longer period, what you're finding is that you were damaging those customers over a much longer period because we weren't thinking about if they returned. We weren't thinking about the lifetime value. We weren't thinking, and the thing, whilst we did obviously want to get away with as much money as possible, we want those customers to remain with the platform, and we didn't actually have any measure of that in the things that we were designing. So really thinking very carefully about what is the effect that you're looking to drive and making sure that it's something that is measurable for me.
I mean, price randomization sounds like my experience on the internet period, right? That sounds like a good description of my life. But seriously, I think what I see is that even in big companies that have established data teams, established data culture, even companies like, even Meta and PayPal and companies like that, they have amazing data people. They have great platforms and tools. And, on paper, they have everything they need to be successful. I think the number one problem is that they don't know what questions to ask. And their framing of the thing that they're working on is not super clear. And I think the most amazing analytics people that I've worked with throughout my career, what makes them good is not that they know Python really well or SQL or, statistics. They're not amazing mathematicians. They can just take a very big, ambiguous problem or take this product and break it down into components and say, okay, listen, basically this is very simple. We have 3 different components. One of them we cannot control. 2 of them we can control. This is the relationship between them. So in ads, if you increase prices, you get less demand. If you lower prices, you get more demand. The relationship between CPM, a number of ads or a number of advertisers and things like that. Just describe what are all the parameters, what are the relationships, what's their hypothesis of how, connecting to what Tom just said, what's their hypothesis of how the product works, prove that it actually works that way, and then everything becomes so easy because you know what you need to do, right? It's very simple. There's only 2 things you need to control. You don't need to focus on anything else, and that's it. And it's very simple. So the most amazing analytics and data teams, that's what they do best, framing, asking the right questions, and simplifying things to terms that every 3 years old can understand.
Yeah, I think I think it's the same point you made, but optimizing for the wrong function, for the wrong metric, which I think can come from being given the wrong direction from leadership or whatever. Thinking of sort of a previous company that I've been in where the kind of top-down pressure on margin means that you're making lots of decisions to kind of optimize for margin in a particular sale. And then, everyone's driving towards that. Everyone's successful in doing that. But then again, when you look at the long term, actually, you're impacting revenue in a negative way, or at least the revenue growth isn't growing as well. So, particularly depending on how your company is funded, you'll get different pressures to look at different places in the balance sheet, and it's really important to I think as a kind of data professional and maybe not that analyst, but someone who's kind of sending instructions down the chain or setting objectives for the analysts, allow them to question and think about, when we're setting up these KPIs, maybe we're changing these two things and mentioning this one thing, but let's think before we start this, what are the things that could also be impacted, and make sure you're catching those and monitoring them as well. So you're kind of thinking about what could go wrong before you start the optimization, so that you can kind of watch those risks and like covariables at the same time.
Maybe one more. Maybe heresy, and maybe something that's heretic to say, but I think also the best teams that have the best data culture also know when you have enough data in order to make a decision, and you don't attempt to boil the ocean to get much more. And actually going on an amount of intuition, I think creates velocity and gives you the ability to ship, and then you can learn, and like that flywheel effect is really important. So I think there's sometimes when you don't need to outsource your intuition to a third-party tool because you have enough confidence. You have sufficient confidence that it's a decent bet, and you may as well take it because you get back a whole load of like capacity from that bet.
Cool, makes sense. Thank you. Going to the example that Tom shared of the price randomization experiment, how do you handle experiments that have these kinds of, I guess, network effects, or people will see an experiment posted on social media? How do you handle these things where people know that they're an experiment and their friends are not?
Well, good. I mean, at Twitter, we just rolled with it, really. Sometimes you're going to be an experiment, and sometimes you're not going to be an experiment group. And so I guess at Deliveroo, when we ran experiments on the network, we were very careful to design experiments such that the entire network was on or off in any particular conditions, such that no one participant in that network for that day would be outside of that experiment condition. But you certainly knew if people were disliking of a certain experiment that you're running, because suddenly riders would be up in arms complaining outside the front door. But certainly at places like Twitter and here at Monzo, if you're in an experiment, you're in it. And we talk about it as that we do run experiments. You may fall into an experiment group, and there's nothing to be scared about. I think seems to me a fairly well understood fact that customers understand that sometimes they're going to see a slightly different treatment, and it's not a scary thing, I'd say, these days.
I think so. There are two things I want to say. One is maybe not everything can be experimented, right? Or not with every population. So to give a very clear example, when I worked on Facebook ads, there's some advertisers who are very simple, and they just create ads, and you can experiment on them day in, day out, and enable some features, disable some features, try whatever you want, and it's going to work. And they may or may not know that they're being experimented. They may or may not be happy about it, but it works. But what we saw is with agencies, they know that they're being experimented, so they just create 10 or 20 different ad managers accounts, and then if they want to use a specific feature and it doesn't work, they just try it with another account until it works, right? So they figure it out, and they actually know, and they explain to us that, yeah, we know you're running experiments, so we just have different accounts, and then we do whatever we want anyway. So I think you have to, sometimes there's this, I think, illusion that you can treat experiments as a black box and just do whatever you want and it will work. And I think that experiments are good, but they don't substitute understanding of what is happening. And when you actually go and talk to your customers and do some research, you actually get this feedback. They tell you, oh, we know you're experimenting, so we just create all of this. And then you can decide on your strategy. Am I just going to exclude agencies from all of my experiments? And maybe it makes sense, maybe sometimes it doesn't, but also realize there are some things that you will not be able to experiment. So I guess that's one thing I want to say. And the second thing is, when you try these experiments, if you don't have this knowledge and you don't understand, at least measure how many of your experiments, when you roll out to the entire population, how many of them still work and how valid they are. And if you try something and it shows, you get a strong response that it's going to work and it's statistically significant and everything, and you're like, great, I'm winning, and then you launch it and you get different results, then know that your experiments are limited and maybe you need to try other tactics as well.
Awesome, makes sense. So I think a common concern around running experiments is people believing that it'll slow down development of products or releasing new features. What is your opinion on that? Have you seen experimentation actually slow things down or move things faster?
I really don't like anything that measures like speed of feature release, really. I mean, obviously you want teams to be productive, but just releasing a lot of code is not a good measure in my opinion. At Captify we have 8 different engineering teams, and they're all encouraged to come up with their own internal like KPI set that they're kind of optimizing for through the year, which ladder up to the overall company objectives, and that's the thing we're measuring them on. It's only with experimentation that you can find like the right thing, the right way to go, because like shipping code is not like does not build a business, right? So I think it's like obviously you want to iterate fast, right? But you don't know if you've iterated in the right direction if you're not measuring it. So shipping without experimentation, without measuring, is kind of like just shooting in the dark, and you don't know you're going in the right direction. You could be running like super fast off a cliff, and that's not a great thing to do, right? So I would always like focus on trying to move the things that said, like get the right KPIs, make sure you're moving those, and those are the things you want to focus on, and you can't do that without experimentation.
I have definitely seen it slow things down. Good example at Twitter. I was some degree removed from the teams working on this stuff, but I joined just before IPO, and we supported GIFs in Twitter, and we had it there for 18 months, and we were so scared to release it because all the metrics that we were looking at some were moving a little direction this way, maybe ad impressions were down very slightly, maybe tweet creation was up just a smidge. There was a laundry list of metrics that were all slightly contradictory. Similar with multi-photo tweets. Like, you can imagine a tweet without a multi-photo tweet now. It's unheard of. They were all quite hard to comprehend directionality on all the various metrics. Some were like painful. Some were, looked like they would be fairly good. But fundamentally, your intuition should say it's a way better experience on Twitter to have GIFs. It's a way better experience to be able to upload multi-photos. The data's telling us something, but our intuition on how we can make this product way better to express yourself should tell us that this is a feature that we should ship. So that feature was held back for absolutely ages until someone finally said, like, it's a thing that it is way better and we should ship it. It's still a thing that I'll see today where we'll run an experiment where we're just not fully clear on what is the measure of success by which we'll make a decision to go forward, and you'll get some results on some secondary metrics that maybe not look so healthy, but you don't have a clear decision making as to this is the thing that we intend to learn, and this is the thing that we need to demonstrate success on, and if we hit this criteria, it's a go. We should ship it.
First of all, I think it's probably the wrong question to ask, right? Because writing tests also slows you down, right? Writing documentation slows you down, but are these things optional? Probably not, right? I don't think that you should ask yourself, is it slowing me down? You should ask yourself, how can I do it better and faster? And if it slows you down a lot and you feel that it's pain, maybe you don't have the right tools, maybe you're doing it the wrong way, maybe you need to change something. But some things shouldn't be optional, right? And I think that's the mindset the team needs to have. And the other thing is that products have a life cycle, right? And I don't know if you know Kent Beck. He's one of the founding members of the Agile methodology and JUnit and extreme programming and a bunch of other things. And he's a very influential person in the software engineering world. He used to work at Facebook, and when I joined, in one of our conversations, he shared a model that he was working on, where he said that he was meeting with an engineering team with the engineering director doing a product review, and the engineering director was saying, "Oh, you're writing too many tests. You're moving too slow. You need to move faster. What are you doing? You're spending too much time on production grade stuff, and this is useless." And then 30 minutes later, the same engineering director would meet with another team and say, "Oh, you're not writing enough tests, your code keeps breaking all the time." He would be like, how is it possible? Like, why is the same person giving different directions? And he came up with this model that looks like an S-curve, and it's got 3 stages to it. So it's explore, expand, extract, right? So every product starts with some exploration. You're just trying ideas, and you keep trying and building and shipping until something sticks, and then all of a sudden you get on this massive growth trajectory where your users keep growing, your revenue keeps growing, everything keeps growing every day. You're running into scalability issues, you're running into performance issues, you're running into, you need more engineers working on it, collaboration issues, everything is growing. And then you reach like a steady state where the product is there, is stable, is working, and you're just trying to keep extracting as much value as possible. And he said, each one of these life cycle looks very, very different. When you're exploring, who cares about tests? Who cares about production? You know, who cares about performance? Just ship things as quickly as possible, try things, see what works, what doesn't, until something sticks. When it starts sticking, you've got a lot of tech debt, and you need to start stabilizing the system. You need to refactor a lot of things. You need to rebuild. You need to start building processes and think about ways the team works, and a bunch of other things. And when you reach the steady state, it's all like monitoring, production. Everything is moving much more slower, but you have to be cautious because you don't want to break a big production system that's generating tons of revenue, right? That's not a good idea. So I think that being conscious of where you are at the product life cycle is also really important.
Awesome, thank you. So as you all agree on like standardization of experiments and metrics, and you also all agree on sometimes you shouldn't run experiments and you should trust your intuition. How do you balance this? How do you standardize people deciding when to run experiments and when to not run experiments? Or if teams specify their own KPIs, how do you make sure that's standardized across those teams, that they're all choosing the right metric?
Oh, if you know the answer to that, I would love to know, because I don't know if there is one simple answer to that, honestly. I think that you do that in dialogue and conversation with the teams when they're talking about the experiments that they want to run and what they think they're going to learn, and it's at that point that you can pull a thread. We do product reviews. I'm sure many folks who've worked in tech companies will know the notion of a product review, where you'll run through what the team are working on. You might do a deep dive on some of the experiments that they want to run or some of the results that they've been getting. And it's at those sort of points when you can sort of pull on that thread about like what's the thing that we actually want to learn from this, and what's the decision that we sort of hope we're going to take out off the back of it. And it's at those points that you can intervene to say, well, does this make sense? I guess I sort of said you don't want to outsource your intuition. I guess culturally you want to try and imbue that in the teams, but fundamentally in practice there's always going to be some team that thinks that they need to run an experiment because they have to demonstrate that the results are. They feel they have to demonstrate that the results are going to be there, such that they get continued funding to work on the program, and so it sort of talks to a leadership problem that we're not helping teams understand that the speed and learning things and getting value to customers is the most important thing, and however you can maximize that cycle, that's the most important thing. Not running an experiment in order to satisfy some internal problem. So really, we do it through product reviews and pulling on the threads when you see teams maybe experimenting on things that don't seem to make all that sense.
I guess for me, the experimentation is not the goal, right? It's the means. And the question that I ask is, how do you know? And if you've got really good conviction and you know that what you're about to launch is going to work, and you think that you don't need to experiment, maybe that's fine, right? Maybe that's okay. If you don't, then and the two other questions I would ask you are going to be, what's the cost of experimenting? Is it going to take you another month, or is it going to take you 3 hours? And what's the risk, or what's the cost of getting it wrong? Like, what's the impact of basically making the wrong decision? And if it's going to be very costly to experiment, it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to complicate things, but it's a very low risk, then just ship it and see what happens, right? And the worst case, roll it back. If the cost of experimenting is very low, then insist on experimenting, because that's a good best practice and the right thing to do. But I think as long as you can get to a conviction, in a way, experimentation is one of the ways you can do it. There may be other ways, and if you're convinced and it's a low risk, then just do it. Why not?
Yeah, I think for me it's the sort of the coaching element of how do you set KPIs, and you see maybe more junior teams measuring kind of like a really short-term output of what they think they're going to change, and then it's sort of like pulling into that, and like, so if that happens, then what's going to happen next, right? What is the result of this? What is the result of that? What could, as kind of the response to the previous question, if this goes in that direction, what could be an effect that causes somewhere else? So it's just about trying to encourage the teams to think more widely, but I do think that there's always going to be a place for intuition. There's some things that you can't measure, right? There's some things that you have to predict, like where the market's going, and advertising regulation is a big thing. Definitely in banking as well, right? Like you have to not only know like where it's going, but predict how other players in the market are going to react to it, and like bringing that insight into your intuition is really important. And some of these things is more of an art than a science, and it comes partly from experience, partly from talking to lots of different people and making sure that you're not too narrowly focused internally, and that you're thinking about the external world as well when you're making decisions.
Cool, makes sense. Thank you. So Tom already provided one example. Are there any more examples that you'll have of experiments whose data resulted in interesting or maybe unexpected result?
Yeah, I can think of one. The company where I work right now, a lot of our customers, they kind of, it's almost invisible to them, our product, because they interact with it through partner products. But we do have a tool that we use internally for kind of creating advertising segments and looking at insight, looking at the data. And we started shipping that externally a few years ago. So what was an internal tool became like an external product. And we were really, really surprised at the kind of like different, essentially customer journeys people were using through that tool, because they weren't kind of trained in our way of working. And it was only when we actually invested in a tool that kind of monitors the actual usage, and so that we could see like, the patterns of how people were hovering and how they're moving, that we could see that there was a certain subsection of our customer set that would just get like completely lost, and that kind of uncovered a whole new understanding of how they were thinking about our business and our product, which was very different to the internal schema that we'd built, and in the end resulted in a complete kind of UX redesign, because like sometimes the perception that you have of how your customers think about your business it's not always mapped to how you think about your business.
It's actually not. I want to connect back to what Amelia just said about looking at the big picture, because I think that's super important, and this is something that a lot of companies miss. And especially if you work in a bigger company, and there are multiple products and multiple product lines, and they're somehow connected, you can do an experiment that is very successful in your space, but it's actually impacting somebody else's product in unexpected ways. And just to give an example, right, at Facebook, at some point there was Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, WhatsApp. Every product was trying to grow, increase their time spent, increase their revenue, whatever. Like, looking at the top line metrics, they were trying to increase that. And Instagram at some point were very successful, launching stories, launching reels, and these kind of things. And there was a point where the company was not looking holistically enough, and until they realized that actually when Instagram is successful, they might be taking away traffic from Facebook, right? Of course, these things have, they impact each other. So, you're not operating in vacuum. And this is where it's important to say, okay, whatever you do, even if your experiment is successful, here are like 5, 6, 10 company level metrics or other metrics that you always need to consider, no matter what you're working on, and that helps connect people with a big picture. So even if you're experimenting with something that is going really well and successful, you really need to think about how you're impacting other teams, and there has to be a clear contract and a clear way of, clear principles of how you make these decisions. For example, if you're going to increase, as an example, Instagram time spent by, 0.5%, but you're going to take away 3% from Facebook, is that acceptable? And yeah.
I've definitely run some stupid experiments in my time. I guess another example of thinking holistically. We ran an experiment where we changed the ranking, how we did the ranking, some of the signals that we used to rank our restaurant list. And one of the changes that we made was to incorporate effectively the commission rate that you received from a restaurant, so to generate more money. And so we changed the ranking, and within 40 minutes or so, you're receiving a call from a very big fast food restaurant saying, "Where are my orders?" Because they had suddenly not received the influx of orders that they would expect from the lunchtime period, because their restaurant, which of course they put a lot of orders through it and therefore had the lowest commission and therefore was now lowest on the restaurant list, and therefore were materially impacted by the fact that they were not getting the volume that they expected. So thinking again just very narrowly about what do I want to optimize? I want to optimize my contribution profit. Is not particularly. You're just not taking due care and attention there, because actually your long-term success of having that partner on board and people come to the platform in order to have that content, as we call it then, and it was hidden from them. So thinking very broadly is super important.
Makes sense. Switching topics a little bit, I guess generally around building products, do you all have a philosophy that you hold strongly on how to build products?
Let me start.
You go.
Yes, so we have a couple of sort of engineering and product principles, I guess, that we use at Monzo. Maybe some of them that are relevant to this conversation. The first is, for us, correctness is important over performance. For a bank, it's important to be correct than it is important to be really fast. We really value the importance of getting something into customers' hands as quickly as possible. And there's a continuum between ship it and be rigorous. And at some point, you need to be super rigorous. And at other points where it doesn't matter, getting something into the hands of customers as quickly as possible so that you can learn and understand and you generate that really harmonious feedback cycle is really important. So thinking about like how you cut your functionality in a way that you give the customer the minimum possible value, the thing that solves the job for them, maybe not in the perfect way, but it gets the job done for them, and you can learn from that, and you can then give customers the thing that they need next. So thinking simple and incremental, and shipping as quickly as possible, and thinking about correctness over performance is maybe three of the principles that we think about.
Yeah, I mean, for us, so we're B2B, obviously, to advertisers. So we have definitely many fewer on probably many orders of magnitude customers than the Monzo, but probably like each customer value much bigger. So the ability to kind of do all of these like lots and lots of micro experiments with like, you know, hundreds and thousands of customers, we don't really have that. So we tend to do a lot more like one-on-one learning with customers. So before even building anything, you know, part of what I do in my role is like out there talking to customers, particularly, you know, our biggest customers who, you know, the big 6 holding group agencies, understanding where they're going, what they're going to be doing, and kind of almost co-developing with them in some cases, like really listening to the customers, and then working with them with kind of like no-code prototypes, this kind of thing, so that we're making sure that we're kind of answering, I mean, it's still experiments, right? But we're answering those, you know, real like desirability questions before shipping any code, because we don't have that sort of huge playground of B2C experimentation.
I'll plus one what Tom and Amelia said about getting real feedback from customers. I think that's the most important thing. I've worked with teams that spend months writing code, designing, doing design reviews on lines of code they hadn't even written, and just talking about it for months without actually shipping, and then you ship and you find out a lot of things are not working as you expected. So the most important thing is, as fast as you can, just get it to a customer, let somebody play with it, get feedback, or launch something, get feedback. And the second thing, which I think is the role of analytics teams, is to drive with understanding and to really know what you're doing and investigate things and answer tough questions. So I remember when I was at boot camp at Facebook, we had one of the senior Android engineers who came, who was talking about developing for Android, and he said that he was super excited about joining Facebook because it was a big challenge for him, and he was a very senior Android developer, and he said, I'm going to teach them how to do Android development. And then he came in and started looking at all the features in the product, and he found this feature that only less than 1% of users are using, and he said, okay, this is taking such and such number of megabytes of the app size, and it's useless, right? Because nobody is using it, until somebody pointed out to him that these less than 1% of people are basically the whole population of Japan, and that's the only reason they use Facebook is because of this feature. So that's where he realized, oh shit, like I really need to understand what I'm saying before I'm jumping to conclusion. And I really think that's the role of analytics teams to develop this kind of understanding, this deep level of knowledge, and to ask those questions and not just make stuff up, but okay, we see that only 1% of the users are using it. Who are they? Where are they from? What are they doing? Let's go and talk to them and find out and ask some questions. I remember an amazing conversation in some research trips where they asked people in Brazil, like in WhatsApp, where WhatsApp is like the #1 app in Brazil, do you know that your conversations are encrypted? And they say, yeah, of course we know, it's everywhere. And then they ask them, okay, is that important to you? And they said, we don't know what encryption means. So I think that this kind of level of understanding and talking to people and getting real feedback is the most important thing.
Awesome, thank you. Are we?
Did you have one more question? Or?
We can switch to the questions from the audience. Yeah.
Okay, great. We have this thing you can throw at people, but I don't know if it works. It's meant to work. It's meant to work? Okay, do you want to speak into it? You don't have to ask a question.
Hello. Hello. 1, 2. Yeah.
It does work. Okay.
Magic.
I was talking into that quietly. It wasn't working. Yes. For a sec, we have one online as well. So I'll throw this thing at you, and then I'll also ask the question we have on our Slack channel. If anyone wants to go on the Slack channel, the QR code is just up there. So the first question we have, how do you decide between build versus buy, especially when factoring data ownership, flexibility, and long-term applicability?
That's a great question. Definitely one of the best product questions, and one which I think as you kind of mature in your experience of how hard it is to build versus buy, I think every kind of engineer like loves to build, right? Everyone loves to build. Product managers love to build too, and so your instinct is always it's not that hard. It's not that I can do this, right? And I probably have this conversation, at least once a month about, we don't need to use that tool because we could easily build it. And what we always come back to is the thing our Captify? Is it our USP? Is this the thing that makes us different from our competitors? Are people coming to us because of our experimentation platform or our authentication tool or even our the way that we distribute our clusters in our backend? No one is, right? So our engineers shouldn't be spending time on that. They need to be spending time on the things that make us different from our competitors and the things that customers want and care about. And so that really is the kind of the line for us in terms of where we should be spending our time in a relatively small team. There's only 40 engineers at Captify, right? So if they're building some core component that we can buy, maybe total cost of ownership might be the same or even less, but it's lost opportunity of the stuff that is what makes us special and what our customers want.
I mean, big plus one to that. I think that says it very, very clearly. I think building on it, I think we would also look at what is the cost of integrating this component, a third-party component. Does it fit in with the data flows? Is there some sort of what's the technical complexity in onboarding this thing that now needs to sort of live as part of your ecosystem? It needs to have some bidirectional sync, or it needs to, you need to be able to get access to the data in certain ways. You need to protect it. You need to secure it. There's a whole sort of set of questions that you would ask. Maybe once you've decided that maybe this isn't our USP, you would ask a whole heap of those other questions. But I absolutely think the first thing to say is this a core competence that we need, or does it unlock a core competence that we need? And if not, then it's probably not a thing to spend time building.
Yeah, and I agree with everything. I'll just connect it back to the S-curve, the explore, expand, extract model, which I think works well here. If I'm a small company, I'm a startup or I'm early stage, I probably don't want to spend any time building anything that's not core competency, and I would be probably willing to spend more money and throw money on problems just to not have to deal with them, which I think is good. And when you're small, these things tend to be not very expensive, right? I think when you need to start thinking about building is when you start expanding and extracting. This is the point where things like cloud computing, right, is, of course, it's super cheap if you're a small company, but if you, I've seen a lot of big companies that run massive operations at large scale, and they're starting to scale back to having their own on-prem setups because it's cheaper for them. So I think when you're small, don't deal with anything that's not core competency. When you start expanding, look what's expensive, renegotiate, and if it doesn't work, then see if it's going to be cheaper to build your own.
I will add that I think your question is probably thinking about specific components and bringing in partners and vendors. It also comes a lot in the M&A world, right? When sometimes the best way to enter a market, bring in a new feature, go for a new customer set is actually find a company that's doing that really well and buy the company, bring the companies together. That sort of build, partner, buy piece can, it works on a lot of different scales.
Can I just ask, the question actually asked about key factors, data ownership, flexibility, and long-term applicability. What about data ownership, if you could rethink your question?
Yeah, so for data ownership, I think you do need to be really careful on that one, particularly, everything's a SaaS platform now. I mean, just look at OpenAI and where we are with that kind of stuff. So for those kind of things, you do need to make sure you're working with vendors that you maintain control of your data. And if the data is resting with them, that it's secure. Like Salesforce, so Snowflake has been like going through the press at the moment with all of this stuff. So that is a key thing to watch. But typically these days, most vendors are kind of buttoned up on that. What was the third? That was just one, right?
These were the three things. So
Okay.
you did answer the flexibility and long-term applicability
Right.
any which way. So the third one you did.
And if I can add to that, on data ownership, like the fact that you're using a SaaS product doesn't mean that you have to send them all of your data, right? I mean, you can still send them anonymized events with no PII and obfuscate some of the data and that sort of stuff. And I mean, you don't have to send absolutely everything. And with a little bit of thinking, I think you can get to a point that you can still get a lot of value from things instead of having to build them yourself and save yourself a lot of time that can be used to build your own product and do the work that only you can do.
On that note, about kind of Mr. Beast and content optimization, how do you think about how experimentation is used in the different companies and how it should be used? So just to see a few examples, product measurement, it's 5% better, could be one. Content optimization could be another. I don't care how much better it is, I just need to know which is the best. User research, so generating learnings. You're happy to run tests that aren't necessarily the best, but you get something really interesting out of it. Canary testing, so you just see that this new software release doesn't crash. And personalization. How do you see that used in organizations? And how do you think experimentation should be used across those different categories? Or if you have any other categories?
So for me, I actually think like one thing that people don't use experimentation for enough is bug fixes. I think like a lot of times there's like intuition around like, oh, I'm fixing this bug that exists, so it will obviously be good. And people just like make that change, like hotfix it, push it to prod, and then something goes wrong. Like maybe they just didn't consider a case that some users are running into that this hotfix, just didn't consider. Or maybe like the scenario that people are running into for that bug actually caused metrics to be better for some reason. A lot of times people just will ship it, not measure it, and then they don't know that things actually went wrong. So I actually always push for, you should test pretty much every bug fix because like the overhead to just add a feature flag or an experiment to just say, if this just do this. If this rollout, then this user has a bug fix. Probably it's going to be good. 1% chance, something goes wrong, then you can flip it back. But you don't have to like roll back all your code. You can safely roll it back.
Long-term holdout groups are actually a thing that we've used previously, where we I talked to the example about how we changed the ranking such that we were charging customers more, the fee, sorry, so we were charging customers more, but not really seeing about whether or not they remained ordering with us. And we obviously learned from that and then instituted holdout groups where we would look at how customers performed over 6-9 months, which means that there's 5%, 2%, I don't know whatever the holdout group was, who are going to get exposed to no experiment treatments for a fairly long period of time. But you're looking for a stable control where you can say, have all the effects of all these experiments that we've run been a net positive to the group or not, and if they haven't, then you can start going back bisecting those and working out maybe what's gone on. But like long-term holdout groups are a really useful thing. At the downside of having to support fairly complex code paths in a lot of ways, and complex code paths when it comes to experiments also then can lead to like really weird bugs where feature flags are on and off and differences between certain environments and. In fact, we had only one this week, which has caused a few fun and games. So it has some downsides, but is a really effective way of sort of looking at the net effect of a load of experiments that you run.
I think for holdouts, especially if you want to measure the impact, after 6 months, a lot of times people say like, you have 10 different people that ran an experiment. Each one was maybe plus 1% revenue. Then everyone says, oh, overall, revenue should be plus 10%, but then you measure at the end and it's, oh, plus 2%. So where'd that plus other 8% go? Who knows? Cool. So we're out of time. Thank you all for attending. Can we get a round of applause for the panelists?